All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Dunk on AP podcast. Today, we're going to be dunking on AP World, and we're going to be talking about developments in East Asia from 1200 to 1450, what we call the post classical era. So, without further ado, let's go dunk on AP World. All right, so remember, of course, in talking about China, we started out talking about the Silk Road. This was a network of ancient trade routes formally established during the Han Dynasty of China in 130 BCE, which linked the regions of the ancient world in trade and connectivity between 130 BCE and 1453 BCE. Of course, we use the terms BCE and AD interchangeably in my class. So remember that China was geographically isolated in a lot of ways that actually helps them culturally because it allows them to establish a more distinct culture from the rest of the world. Now, understand that the cultural underpinnings of China are always going to have Confucianism in there whenever we talk about them historically. That's going to mean that they're going to adhere to their ancestors. They're going to adhere to their. It's a patriarchal society where they adhere to their fathers and to the male figures in their family, but also where you have much more of an adherence to the whole rather than an adherence to the individual. So women, of course, in this society are second-class citizens. Remember classics of filial piety and lessons for women. Remember the idea that you are subservient to the elders in your family. So remember, China has a big centralized bureaucracy, and that is basically it's going to start with the Jin and Han dynasties. After the death of Christ in the AD period, but that centralized bureaucracy is going to be centered around the mandate of heaven, essentially saying that rulers of the Song or of any Chinese dynasty are going to be in charge because that is what God willed to happen, right? The mandate of heaven. And that was not necessarily even crazy. That was not limited to China at this time. That's how a lot of rulers in this time, China or otherwise, are going to legitimize their power. So remember that Buddhism does have a lot of influence in China after its establishment in India. And that is going to be something that leads to the establishment of Neo Confucianism in Song China, but we'll get there here in just a minute. So you got the Sui dynasty from 589 to 619 AD. This was short-lived in China, but it established a very, very centralized rule. They built the Grand Canal, one of the world's largest waterworks projects before modern times. They also had high taxes and forced labor, and that caused people to turn against the dynasty. So then you've got the Tang dynasty from 618 to 907 AD. This organizes China into a powerful, productive, and prosperous society. They establish a transportation and communication network, as well as a distribution of land based on an equal field system and the reliance on a bureaucracy based on merit. So you're going to see Song Dynasty gets the credit for a meritocracy, a society in which people are promoted based on their actual skill. But in reality, you start to see that in the Tang dynasty as well. So basically, what you've got strong power at the top, and you've got people around the state leading the power charge, and they sort of collect what they need to get from their individual people. But all of that power will be concentrated at the top. So then you've got the Song dynasty, and this is the one you really, really need to know when you're talking about East Asia. So the Song dynasty was the leading example of diversity and innovation in Afro-Eurasia and the Americas in the early 13th century. So they also helped China develop into the greatest manufacturing capability in the world. So they rule through a bureaucracy. Of course, that's what we're seeing in China through the ages, a vast organization in which well-paid and appointed officials carry out the empire's policies. They're around for a long time, and they even expand after the Song. So Songzhi, the first Song emperor, he had a distrust of the military and a big emphasis on civil service, education, and industry and the arts. Of course, remember they were a meritocracy, and this really showed itself in the civil service exam, which was based on Confucian teaching. Essentially, if you were a person of status, if you were a person of money, really technically if you were anybody, but it helped a lot if you had money where you could just go and study for this exam based on Confucian teachings, you could have a really, really good government job in the Song dynasty. Of course, one of the things that leads to the growth of the Song dynasty is fast ripening rice. Of course, Champa rice is imported a little bit before this, but that's what you have here is that agricultural production makes it so that technology like plows and animal power and good irrigation systems make it so that you can feed a lot more people. And of course, always this is going to lead to a population boom. And if you're looking for a city to sort of put a name to that, it's Hangzhou. So this leads to a massive population surge in China during the Song dynasty. Now, speaking about women, remember, of course, this is a patriarchal society structure. Tang and especially Song dynasties really had tight restrictions on women, really to preserve family fortunes in this increasingly wealthy society. They wanted you to get married to a well-connected and rich man. This manifested itself in foot binding, which involved the tight wrapping of young girls' feet with strips of cloth that prevented natural growth of the bones and resulted in tiny, malformed, curved feet. This was done to make young Chinese women more attractive to potential husbands. And this happened in China. While it was technically outlawed in the 1900s, this still happens for a long time. Um, so remember the big things that you need to know about Song China, all the things that I've mentioned so far, but especially their trade with the outside world and what they traded. So porcelain, the Tang dynasty discovered how to produce lighter, thinner, and more adaptable pottery. This diffused to other empires all over the world. The Tang and the Song gained a reputation for their amazing porcelain. Metallurgy, the Tang and Song craftsmen improved metallurgical technologies that led to better weaponry and industrial tools. And then gunpowder. Taoist alchemists discovered that mixing charcoal, saltpeter, sulfur, and arsenic created an unstable reaction, and this was weaponized into gunpowder. And of course, this is going to spread like wildfire, no pun intended, on the battlefield, and it's going to expand well past China. China does invent an early printing press. Now, remember, of course, that China is trading navally too. They tend to trade mostly navally with Korea and Japan, but they do actually use Persian, Arab, and Indian and Malay traders for longer trade. They do have good ships though. So yes, you do see China on overland trails a lot, but they are also trading navally as well. This develops a market economy because so many people are well fed that you can worry about things like trade and you can worry about things like inventions. And so now you've got, rather than just people making agricultural products, they're also making products to trade. The only thing is this actually leads to so much money that traders are traveling with all this silver money. So China actually invents paper money. And China through their trade on the Silk Road, they're actually going to revive it. They're going to revive the Silk Road in a lot of ways, and their trade is massively important with silk, porcelain, and lacquerware. The only problem is this is not going to last forever. The divisions based on Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism, and Mahayana Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, as well as Islamic traders establishing mosques in China, this is going to start to put splits in that Confucian. Remember, China had been geographically isolated. It's going to put splits in that Confucian wall that China had up. This leads to Neo-Confucianism in the Song dynasty. So while they're not persecuting Buddhism per se, they do push to get that Confucian tradition back. And this is a theme in history where you start to see your culture start to die away, so you push to try to get it back, right? Confucianism, Neo-Confucianism reflected the increasing influence of Buddhism mixed with Confucian values in the Song dynasty. This would influence moral, philosophical, and political thought in East Asia for 500 years. Zhu Ji was the most important representative of Song Neo-Confucianism. He wrote a treatise titled Family Rituals that provided detailed instructions for weddings, funerals, veneration for ancestors, and other family ceremonies. He advocated for people to play their proper role in society. So that's what you really need to know about Song China. Let me really quick mention the rest of Asia. Japan is greatly influenced by China. Vietnam is greatly influenced and takes in a lot of cultural things from China. Korea, same deal here. All of them are going to have on and off tension with China. Vietnam and Korea will on and off have to work for independence against China. Japan is never explicitly invaded by them, but they do. But they do have a lot of influence from China, almost kind of like taking it in while not always meaning to take it in. But in medieval Japan, you have fights between two clans, the Taira and the Minamoto, which led to a Minamoto victory and establishment of the shogun, a military governor who ruled in place of the emperor, but who ruled in the name of the emperor in 1125. This leads to the Kamakura in Muromachi periods, Kamakura being 1185 to 1333, and the Muromachi, which was 1336 to 1573 period. In that time period, in which members of the Minamoto clan dominate political life. A much more distinct Japanese culture is developed in this time. The samurai were professional warriors, specialists in the use of force in the arts of fighting. They served as provincial lords of Japan, kind of like police for the military leadership. So the big things you need to know here: the Song dynasty establishes its power through Confucianism, and through the administration of the civil service exam and people who were actually qualified administering the kingdom of the Song dynasty, which really kept a lot of its power, again, through the mandate of heaven. The Song dynasty trades big time stuff: metallurgy, porcelain, silk. They do this overland, but they also do it by sea to a lesser extent. So that's the big stuff you need to know about the resurgence of empire in East Asia. Y'all have a good one.